Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Better Product Solutions podcast, bringing you Harry Moser, founder and president of the Reshoring Initiative, talking about trends in reshoring. Harry outlines his total cost of ownership estimator tool and some of the factors to consider in reshoring versus outsourcing, and also talk about how companies in the US can help in the reshoring effort. So, really happy to have Harry on, offering a new perspective on reshoring. And so, without further ado, I bring you Harry Moser. Thank you. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Better Product Solutions podcast. This is Steve Davis, president of TapeCon, and really happy to have Harry Moser here, founder and president of the Reshoring Initiative. I'm going to let Harry get into the himself and he can talk about the Reshoring Initiative. But excited to have you on, Harry. And I was just talking to you about how I, this morning when I woke up was thinking, when did I first see Harry? And I finally solved the riddle that it was Assembly Magazine. Your feature, Moser on Manufacturing, was the first time I think I read about you in Assembly Magazine. So pretty honored to have you on the podcast finally, and welcome. And I guess my first question, tell us about yourself and the Reshoring Initiative.
First, it's great to be here, Steve. And Casey, it's been good to work with you and in putting this together. The little background on me, I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, right across the river from New York City. And the biggest thing in town was Singer sewing machine. Many of the listeners, their mother had it, they have a Singer sewing machine. And the factory there in Elizabeth, back about 100 years ago, was the biggest factory of any kind in the world, 2.5 million square feet, 5,000 workers. It was a Goliath of its time. Grandfather worked there, father ran about a third of it. I worked there summers. I went past 20 years ago and everything was gone. As far as I can tell, nothing's made there anymore. Everything's imported. And in my career selling machine tools, foundry equipment, things like that, I tried to sell to company after company, industry after industry, and they went out of business before I'd get to sell them anything because the imports had wiped them out. So based on my personal experience, but based on the city, the state, et cetera, something had to be done. And that motivated me to found the Reshoring Initiative. So grew up in Elizabeth, went to MIT, got engineering degrees, University of Chicago MBA, ran GF Machining Solutions, was called Charmy at the time, EDM and high-speed milling machines, was the president of that for 22 years, been in manufacturing for 55 years altogether. So I have a lot of manufacturing time in.
We have a local here in Buffalo, New York. We have a Buffalo Niagara Manufacturers Alliance with a lot of tool and die guys. So I know that they'll probably relate to some of the references that you just made for sure. And it's funny, you hear a lot about people talking about meaningful work, and this whole thing with the Reshoring Initiative that you have going on. It's obviously it's got a passion gear. You've got a passion gear on it because of the background that you just described, seeing things kind of as things change, right? And as I've listened to you too, there's you can tell you've got motivation behind kind of the mission. I was going to read the mission off the website, but I didn't want to bore people. But maybe can you just hit? I know there's a target that you have outlined in terms of kind of like a big goal, a big outlandish goal of number of jobs reshoring. Can you just hit on that quickly?
Sure. So our goal is to balance the trade deficit for goods so that we import as much as we export, equal numbers, and that would increase U.S. manufacturing by 5 million jobs by about 40%. So it'd be a monumental tidal change in U.S. manufacturing. We would recover what we've lost over the last, say, 40 or 50 years.
Well, I'm envious of that big goal. It's like anybody with a vision. It's always nice to have that huge stretch goal. And yeah, it feels daunting, but it sounds like you've been chipping away at it for a while. With and obviously with COVID and there's so much more talk about global supply chain disruption and everything going on. It's really probably brought this conversation of reshoring a little bit more to the forefront and given you a lot of attention on what you've been working on. But if you were to lay out, I guess, the favorable side of reshoring, kind of what would you say are the favorable trends that you're seeing in reshoring? Not only, since the COVID type disruption, but maybe even before that.
Well, yeah, we started in 2010, and in that year, about 6,000 jobs were announced to come back. Combination of reshoring and FDI, foreign direct investment. So GM versus Toyota, say, and and by last year, we're still finalizing the numbers, but it's going to be somewhere over 200,000 per year in last year. So cumulatively, over a million of the jobs in the U.S. today would not be here if the reshoring and the FDI had not happened. So there's no question that the trend has been very favorable. When we started, people said it was at best going to be a trickle, and now it's maybe not quite a flood, but it's a good solid stream, and we're very happy with it. So some of the things that have made that happen, certainly President Obama, President Trump, President Biden have all helped with policies, and I mean, some of their policies helped and some of them hurt, but they certainly had some policies that helped. Chinese wages going up at 10 to 15% a year for 20 years has driven their costs up substantially, so that even before COVID, even before the trade war, work was coming out of China. Now, it was typically going to Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, somewhere like that. But increasingly, companies are saying, if I look at all the costs and I bring it back, I can get much of it, not all, but some, 20, 30% of it back to the US. And it's sure a lot safer, sure, certainly a lot more stable, more sustainable to have the work done right here, right close by, instead of having to rely on ports and oceans and all the COVID and all these kind of things that can go wrong between Asia, for example, and the U.S.
Yeah, I've heard some people that I know in other industries talking about, price of a container right now sounds absolutely outrageous. So I don't. Our industry doesn't deal with that as much. So I don't feel as much of that pain. One thing I remember listening
But
to.
let me say,
Sir, go ahead.
yeah, it doesn't directly hit your industry, but it hits your customers' industry. So let's say your product is going on to an appliance of some kind. The fact that the appliance sellers, the brands, can't get appliances in efficiently from Korea, from China, from wherever, makes them more likely to produce here in the US, which then gives you and other people in your industry the opportunity to sell more here.
Thank you for that. I remember in a previous podcast you mentioned um, that 50%, I think it was 50% China in terms of where the imports are coming from, and then 50% the balance from the rest of the world. And then also there was a reference to kind of the why behind the raising wages in China. And they had, a rule in place of having a certain amount of children, and that seems to be now catching up. Is that still the main reason for you're seeing rising wages, or is there something even behind that?
Go back to economics 101. When you have increased demand and falling supply, the price goes up. And in China, through very clever, economic industrial policy, they've managed to raise the standard of living, the demand, the consumer demand dramatically, a factor of 10 or something like that over the last 20 years. And so the people are buying more, they've got money to spend. We've bought more, and they themselves have bought dramatically more, and so the demand has gone up. But at the same time, the supply of labor is actually dropping. Their workforce is falling at, I can't remember if it's 1 million or 2 million workers per year, and that's because of the one-child policy that went into effect maybe 35 years ago, something like that, which they had to do because they were so poor and they had so many people on a limited amount of land, arable land, and so on. So they had to do it. But now, maybe 3 years ago, they relaxed that and said you can have as many kids as you want. But the Chinese have become middle class, and instead of needing more kids to scratch in the rice pad, they want to have fewer kids so they have money left to travel and do the nice things that the middle class likes to do. And so even now that they're allowed to have more kids, the birth rate has actually, I think, dropped from where it was when the one child policy was in effect. So they've gotten out of the habit of having kids, you might say.
Right.
And so therefore the cohort of people, the workforce that should be filling the factory now is not is falling. First, the number is falling, and increasingly, just like Americans, they don't especially want to go to work in the factory anymore. They want to become artists and musicians
Yep.
and philosophers and so on. So I saw a story from a Chinese factory owner saying, "This is impossible. I can't get anybody to come into manufacturing anymore."
Hmm. On your main page, and I guess to get back into my main script, but on the main page, there's this TCO calculator, this total cost of ownership calculator. Can you explain all the factors and considerations? Because it's not so easy to really do the analysis of this make versus buy, outsource for low cost option for a product versus make in house. And can you explain what that tool is and what are all the factors and cost considerations that the tool is valuable?
Sure, I can't do it all because we don't have time, but I can do some of it. The purpose of the tool, the reason I wrote the tool, was because the most uh, procurement people, most purchasing people at bigger companies look only at the price, the FOB price. I can buy it in the US for 10, I can buy it in China for 7 or India or wherever. Of course, I'll go there and get it for 7. That's cheaper, you know. And my bonus, my career depends on that. My boss's career is also, he's got objectives too. So they're very focused on buying the lowest priced object, something called purchase price variance, PPV. And and so instead, we say no. Certainly, the price is important, but you should look at the total cost. And so, in addition to the FOB price, we would add in the hidden costs. We call the hidden costs because most people ignore them. And starting with duty, freight, Trump tariffs, if there are any, carrying cost of inventory. Inventory will be 2, 3, 5 times as high with an imported product as with one locally supplied. The risk of stocking out is, as you've seen happen over the last year or two, risk of stocking out. If you stock out and you can't ship, you lose a customer. Horrible consequences. The value of having engineering at the buying company, being able to work with manufacturing, for example, at a supplier such as yourselves. There's an advantage of them being able to physically get together to talk in the same time zone, in the same language, and optimize. So there's 29 of these factors that are included in the hidden costs. And when you take price plus hidden costs, you get total cost. And to show you the power of that, I took the first 189 cases where users had gone and used the TCO estimator, which is online, had used it and compared a US source to a foreign source. And based on price, the US was the winner 8% of the time. Based on total cost, 32% of the time. And if there happened to be a Trump 15% tariff, then US won 46% of the time. So it's just a throwaway elevator speech term. I say that something like 20 to 30% of what companies now import, they would produce and source here if they just did the math correctly.
Mhm. Yeah, and the other challenge I feel also is automation is, whenever you talk to someone, North America about how they're going to be price competitive, automation seems to be in at least the top 3, if not the top answer to that. Oh, we're going to automate, we're going to improve operational efficiencies. But the capital expenditure, evaluation process is right in there too. I mean, because is generally speaking to offset that difference, especially if it's labor intense, there's going to be some capital investment made to 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 try to, I guess, bring it back in line to make that more of a make in house decision. How do you see those struggles coming about in terms of how you wrestle with the capital expenditure implication in the TCO calculator and factoring in the fact that you might need to buy a piece of equipment to have it tip. Have you seen, I guess, can you share anything on that?
Well, first of all, if I'm a buyer, if I was talking to a buyer, I'd say you could even not do it yourself. You could send it out to TapeCon, have them do it for you. And then you don't have to worry about the capital expenditure. You just look at the price from TapeCon versus the offshore supplier, for example. So one, and it turns out that in fact, at least half of what's offshore is outsourced offshore as opposed to in-house offshore. So in many cases, when the work is coming back, it is outsourced in the United States to contract manufacturers of some kind. So that'd be a first answer. Second answer, when they consider the feasibility of reshoring, and they say, the labor costs here are 5 times as high, whatever, 10 times as high, depending on the other country. We're going to have to automate the heck out of this thing to have any chance of bringing it back profitably. Mm-hmm. And if they look at the only look at the FOB price, say 10 in the US currently and 7, say from China, but to get the 10 down below 7, you've got to reduce manufacturing costs, so labor, burden, and material by 30%. And to do that is extremely difficult. Whereas if you do the TCO calculation, say, there's only a 5 percentage point TCO difference. We're only high by 5%. Now it's feasible to do enough automation and get a return on that automation and get that 5% down and be able to justify it, we'd say, in maybe 20% of the cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like people are looking through the wrong lens. They need to look through the TCO lens and not the way we've kind of always been doing it, which is just the price, right?
The price. Yeah, it's just the same idea. I could buy 2 cars, which are roughly equivalent. One car gets 30% better gas mileage. Well, you have to consider the gas mileage in what you're willing to pay for the car, because that's going to save you money over the next 10 or 15 years.
So what would you say to, I guess, a North American business, whether it's an OEM here in the States or a tiered supplier like a TapeCon supplying the OEM market? What would you say to either someone who's in the procurement side of the OEM business, or any small and medium sized business, on how they can, I guess, help with reshoring? What are some of the things that they should consider to help you get your number of your big goal?
Well, first I would say that it's in their own interest, and let's say in the interest of their community, in the interest of their country, they should that the reshoring trend has been strong enough that the company should be at least willing to do the math, pick some representative parts or products, and see if it makes sense to bring them back. So not much cost, modest amount of time, good understanding, at least out of patriotism and sense of community, do the math. Look for some parts that make sense to come back, and then when you find the ones where you'll be more profitable by bringing them back, then obviously in your own self-interest, bring them back. So that's where I'd start. I'd add to that the when you look at, like, I have this sort of triage kind of idea. If you're a big company and you're offshoring a lot, well, don't offshore anything more without doing TCO, because once you've offshored it, there's a one-time transitional cost to bring it back, tooling, people, technology, what have you. So be careful about what you offshore. The second, you've got it offshored, outsourced. Well, that's the easiest thing to bring back, because that's somebody else's problem to make it, and that's not yours. And then third, you've got your own factory offshore, and say it's shipping 50% into Asia and 50% back here. Well, then think about changing that so that over the next 3 or 4 years, it's shipping 90% into Asia, and you build your additional capacity back here. And the toughest thing is for me to go into some company that just built a $100 million factory in China and say, shut the factory down and spend 150 million to build one here in the United States. It's a pretty tough sell. Not going to happen. So I go for the bright red apples.
Yeah, my brother has a degree in supply chain management. I had to ask him whether or not he ever had a course that actually went into this type of TCO calculation to look at outshore versus reshore. I have no idea, but I can't imagine, or maybe these are being taught in universities, or people are, or these types of topics are being discussed in some of the supply chain type trade associations to educate people. Do you think a lot of it is just an education of this TCO approach when they're doing their analysis, so that you're just not doing the analysis under kind of a false pretense?
Yeah, they don't think it's false. They think they think it's clear and direct because they have a nice hard number, the price, and nobody can argue with them on the price. Whereas we can all argue about what's the probability of the product being late coming in from offshore, the risk of intellectual property loss. You know, all these, a lot of these factors I talk about are rather qualitative, and one could argue about them. But it's a choice. Should I put some value on them, or should I ignore them completely? We say logically put some value on them.
Mhm.
Universities, I've taught classes at 4 or 5 universities in their supply chain groups on this. The trade associations, ISM, CSCMP, CIPS, I think, APIX, all I've spoken at all of them and at their events online, et cetera. So they're all aware of it, but collectively, the supply chains don't push it. The NAM, National Association of Manufacturers, doesn't push it. They should be telling all their companies, all their members, here's the math, get out and do it. Let's bring back everything we can and strengthen U.S. manufacturing. And they'll talk about it a little bit, but they never go after it as hard as I do.
Yeah, yeah, no. I I know that, obviously publicly traded companies are gonna do press releases and you're gonna read about, big case studies, and you've been tracking a lot of different case studies of reshoring, I'll say success stories. It's a little more difficult when you're talking about companies like mine that are privately held, small to medium size, and so it's tough to get the data of who's reshoring, who's not. By the way, that's a really cool shirt, by the way. I was gonna say that at the end and have you show the
Okay.
shirt if you didn't show it.
Okay. Here, I think I've got
Yeah,
something on
sorry
my
for those
screen.
sorry for those who are just listening, but Harry's wearing a pretty cool shirt.
Manufacturing is
Yeah,
cool T-shirt,
yeah.
and
Manufacturing is cool T-shirt.
every company that submits a case of reshoring that we didn't already know about gets a free T-shirt. And of course, guess where the cotton is grown and the shirt is produced?
I think that would be stateside.
Oh, you're so smart.
Well, this was gonna be my last question actually, but, uh, on the cases, is there any particular, market area, or an area that's maybe picking up more steam than other areas of the types of case studies that you're monitoring that are kind of a clear leader of reshoring? I mean, given their, most recent climate?
Yeah. So I looked at I ranked the industries by the number of jobs coming back. And in 2021, the biggest by far, consistently year after year, is transportation equipment because it's such a big industry. You know, so much going on and so much FDI, so many foreign companies putting up factories, Toyota, Mercedes, et cetera. Computer and electronics products is number three. Medical equipment, number four. Electrical equipment and appliances, number five. Machinery, number six. And I pulled those numbers out instead of mentioning all, because all of those are the kind of industries that might use some of your products
Yep.
and some Tapecon products. And so I wanted to have these be relevant to the people that might be listening. And then I went through our file. We have a library that lists 6,000 cases, I think, of reshoring and FDI. And I pulled out some actual examples. So in appliances, GE in Louisville had been having their appliances largely made in China. They brought that back into the U.S. Eventually, that division of GE got purchased by a Chinese company, but they've then continued to expand and invest and produce even more in the United States. That's been a good story. Electrolux appliances again was a very good case of work coming back. Bosch, formerly called BSH, but Bosch, basically appliances, invested here in North Carolina and has brought in 460 jobs. Generac, most of us know about Generac,
Yep.
especially during the winter blizzards.
Yeah, my father
And
keeps bragging about his Generac whenever he ever loses power.
they brought work back from China to Whitewater, Wisconsin, in agricultural equipment, AGCO, in other kinds of machinery, Caterpillar, a company called Granulator Plastic Processing Machinery, a Cincinnati company called Freeman Schwab Machinery brought back hydraulic die cutting presses that they used to get made offshore. Airbus, got to be someone on an airplane. Automotive companies, we all know about BMW, Daimler, Ford. All of them have either done reshoring or FDI. So I think maybe important to note, a lot of those are these foreign companies that have come over here and invested. So I have found that the foreign primary company, like the Toyota or the Daimler or what have you, they've been more aggressive investing here, I'd say, than the GM and the Ford. And in many cases, they bring with them, many cases, but not all, they bring with them their foreign suppliers. So when they come over, they bring the Japanese or the German or whatever, who puts a factory near those. But I'm convinced that an aggressive U.S. manufacturer can offer just as good a product at as good a price and delivery as those foreigners can come over, because they've got American workers, American costs, American whatever. So what I'm saying is, look for the U.S. companies, but also look for the foreign direct investment that's happening, and find a way to become a supplier to more of those. Instead of just working on your traditional U.S. customers.
Yeah, no. I think we're going to end there here. I really appreciate that, and that was a great summary at the end there too. So, thanks for being on. Is there anything that you want to kind of, I don't know, wrap up with, or say anything to the audience before we close?
So I would love to hear from anybody who has reshored. If I didn't know about already, you can get the shirt, okay? And if you're thinking about it, or think there's a possibility for your company to reshore, or to convince one of your customer companies to reshore, most of the tools you need for that are on our website. And if you can't find it and you still need more help, but you think it's a real possibility, then you email me, info@reshorenow.org. You call me, 847-867-1144. My job is to help you get us up to that 5 million target.
Nice. Okay, Harry, thanks so much. Thanks for being on the podcast, and take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye, Steve, Casey. Bye, everybody.
Thanks. The Better Products Podcast is about educating product teams about new materials and new technologies, all in the custom material converting and printed electronic space, to help them design and build better products. So in this podcast, I'm hoping to get wide-ranging conversations with various people throughout the industry and just bring a lot of good content to the table. So if you're interested in learning more about the industry, materials, processes, how to improve products if you're on a product team, or just general know-how of what the heck is going on in this industry, then subscribe to the podcast and get ready for some more really good episodes as I bring in some great guests. Thanks.